and welcome to Legislative Report. I'm Anthony Tezak. During parole hearings, a victim impact statement can have a powerful influence over those voting on whether or not to set an offender free. But until recently, crime victims only had the option of submitting written comments to a parole board. They were not allowed to address the board in person. All of that will change now that House Bill 492, now Act 14, has been signed into law. Here to talk about this new law that will expand victims' rights is the measure's co-sponsor, State Representative Ryan Mackenzie. Welcome, Representative.
Thank you for having me, Anthony.
Now, House Bill 492 really came to light because of one case out of Montgomery County, and Kay will just take a few moments to talk about that.
Sure. And
the case was Raphael Robb, a prominent professor in the Philadelphia area, who brutally murdered his wife, Ellen Gregory Robb, just days before Christmas as she was actually wrapping the presents for the couple's daughters. It was described as one of the most brutal crime scenes for some of the most veteran detectives, and this self-confessed wife killer, more or less, he was sentenced to a maximum sentence of 10 years, and he was up for parole after serving much less than that.
That's correct, and unfortunately, you know, the parole board was making a decision without having any commentary from the victim's family, or obviously the victim had passed away in this instance, but none of that was going to be taken into consideration. And you know, unfortunately, that would have changed the outcome. And so if it weren't for the intervention of local officials, instead of the victims' advocates and families, the local officials had to get involved in this case. They were able to provide some more information to the parole board, and they were able to reconsider their decision, and their efforts actually prevailed, and Raphael Robb now still remains behind bars. And that's where he should be in this instance, and when all of the information was presented to the parole board, they ended up making the right decision there. And so, as you mentioned, House Bill 492, which I was a co-sponsor of and was now signed into law, what it does is it mandates that a victim or a victim's advocate can go and present their information to the parole board. It's not mandatory. It's their decision. If they want to go and present this information, they can do so, but it is mandated that they be allowed to do that if they want to.
And before this bill, that was not the case, correct?
That's correct. And so it was not required that their testimony had to be taken into account. And so, again, this mandates that they have to be considered and their testimony has to be considered. It's not a requirement that they have to do it. If they don't want to, that's their decision and they don't have to partake. But it does mandate that they have the option to participate. And the other thing that it does is it also, obviously, these are very difficult and traumatic situations for victims or victims' family members or anybody who's going to testify on their behalf. And so it does allow for video teleconference or other uses of technology to allow these victims to participate and provide their testimony, but allow them to do so maybe from you know, another location where they might feel more comfortable. And then another thing to remember and to take into account with this piece of legislation is that the testimony that is provided will stay confidential between the victim or the victim's testifier, whoever's testifying on their behalf, and the parole board, so that that is confidential information, and that's the way that it should be. And so, again, these are huge improvements for victims and victims' rights, and so we were really glad that we were able to get that through this legislative session, and a long overdue improvement.
And I think this says a lot about the process and about your job as a state representative. I mean, this man, I mean, he made no bones about it. He confessed to killing his wife in cold blood, and he was just days away from being released from prison and walking away a free man. And because of this piece of legislation, he now sits in jail.
That's correct. And so again, if it weren't for the intervention of local officials in the Robb case, the Robb family's testimony wouldn't have had to have been considered. But again, once they were able to submit their testimony, they were able to change the parole board's decision. And so clearly there was some critical information there that should have been considered, and once it was considered, the outcome changed and was correctly changed in that case. And so again, we want to make sure that the parole board has this information in front of them at the time when they're making the decisions, and so that the process is done correctly. And so mandating that they take into account this testimony will make sure that all information, again, if the victim or the victim's testifier wants to have that information taken into account, it will be there, and it's, again, going to improve the process for all victims.
And on top of that, I mean, you know, when you look at the legislative process, this is a piece of legislation that sailed through both sides of the legislature fairly quickly, and it had a lot of support from various organizations across the state, correct?
It did. You know, it had support from the Office of the Attorney General, from the Probation and Parole Board, and from victims advocate groups, lots of other groups, the District Attorney's organization here in Pennsylvania, a large number of supporters. But still, we have to go through the legislative process to make a change like this. We were amending the Crimes Act, and so we had to go through and make those changes. And you know, again, sometimes things take longer than they should in the legislative process, and so I'm just glad that we were able to get this done now.
And there are other pieces of legislation that have also made their way through the House that helps protect victims' rights. And one of these pieces of legislation is House Bill 663, which talks about human trafficking. You supported this piece of legislation. Can you tell us a little bit about it and why?
Yeah, so, you know, human trafficking is one of these things that you hear about oftentimes, and you think that it wouldn't be taking place here in Pennsylvania. Unfortunately, that's not the case. It does occur, and we have instances where individuals are being trafficked, usually for sex purposes. And so what we would like to do is establish the trafficking of a minor as a first-degree felony, establishes a parent selling or transferring custody of a minor for commercial sex purposes as a second-degree felony, and establishes a civil clause of action for coercion into prostitution. So again, these are heinous crimes that are taking place, unfortunately, sometimes here in Pennsylvania, and we want to make sure that we really crack down on this type of thing.
And in today's day and age, with the internet and, you know, these new types of theft regarding identity thefts, you know, one of the big things now is, you know, people stealing the identity of children and, you know, basically ruining their credit and lives, you know, before they even know it.
Sure.
You know, what has the House Republicans done to try to prevent this?
Yeah, this is another big issue. You know, lots of individuals here in Pennsylvania have faced and encountered the really a difficult crime of identity theft, and anybody who has gone through and suffered that knows how hard it is to recover your identity, reestablish your credit, and clear all of those things up. The problem for minors is that they often won't be checking their credit, or won't even know that their identity has been stolen until they turn 18 and they go to apply to college and receive a student loan or apply for a credit card or something of that nature. And so these crimes can go undetected for a very long time. And so what we would do is we would increase the grading of the offense for identity theft when the victim is under the age of 18. And really it's something that I think would make it a stronger penalty for somebody who commits, again, just a terrible crime. And you know, really we want to try and crack down on identity theft in general as well. But really, if we can get this piece of legislation through the Senate and signed into law, it'll help it reduce that identity theft of minors. And again, something that we should do, and we're going to urge the Senate to take up in the fall.
And this is really important because, as you said, this could really ruin a person's life.
Oh my gosh! Again, you know, especially in the case of a child, but in identity theft in general, it can ruin an individual's life, and it can take years to recover not only monetary losses, but also those tarnishes on your credit record. And when you're trying to live in a modern society like we are, you're going to need to be applying for and showing your credit history when you're renting an apartment, sometimes when you're applying for jobs, you know, when you're getting a loan to go to college, when you're getting a new credit card, when you're buying a car. I mean, so many things that are just part of our everyday life require that you show a clean credit history, and you know, if you've been a victim of identity theft, it can be very hard to carry on your life. And that's not even to mention the other problems that you face if somebody has stolen your social security number and you're trying to receive benefits from the government, and you know, all of these things that can go on with identity theft really have a detrimental impact on society, causing billions of dollars in damages every year across the United States. And so it's a huge crime. We're trying to crack down on it. And I urge individuals who are out there and looking for more information on identity theft to go to the federal government website. The FTC has a website set up specifically focused on identity theft. You can learn all about how to take preventative steps to stop identity theft, which is very important, to make sure you can do everything you can to reduce the likelihood of being a victim. And then also it has the steps that you can take if you are a victim, unfortunately, the steps that you can take to clear up your record and you know, make sure that those who are out there and that we can track down are held accountable as well.
That's some great information for people to be able to go and search and get some
Yeah,
answers.
and you know, if anybody would like more information about that website or what we have on hand to help them prevent or stop identity theft, they can certainly contact our office.
And you know, in similar to identity theft, but kind of not the same thing, is online impersonation. And we've all heard the horrific stories of, you know, these high school aged children that are, you know, bullying other children, you know, to the point that we've had, unfortunately, some teenagers commit suicide over the bullying. And a bill has been introduced to help stop this, correct?
That's correct. And so House Bill 764 would make online impersonation a crime when you use the name or identifying information of another person in digital space, whether it be to send out an email or post a comment, and then you're making harassment or terroristic threats, stalking of individuals, anything like that. When you're using somebody else's name and you're impersonating them, we think that should be a crime. And you know, again, we live in a modern society now where things are changing very quickly and rapidly. This is one of these things that people weren't probably thinking about even just a couple of years ago. And so we have to update our laws to keep pace with technology. And again, this is another thing that's awaiting consideration in the Senate, and we're hoping they'll take this up in the fall as well.
All right, Representative Mackenzie, you know, congratulations on this. I mean, you said it, you know, these are changing times. You know, we need to keep up with the pace, and House Republicans obviously are doing just that and making sure that our laws are up to date with the ever-changing technology. Thank you so much for joining us today. And again, House Bill 492, you know, kept the murderer behind bar at least for another year until his next parole hearings.
Absolutely, and anything we can do to protect victims and victims' rights, please, you know that the House Republicans and myself, that is a top priority for us, and we're going to keep working on that.
Great job. That's absolutely excellent. That's all the time we have for today's program. If you have any questions about today's topic or any state government related matter, please feel free to contact Representative Mackenzie at his local office or through his website. The address and phone number will be shown in just a moment. Thanks again for watching, and please join us again next time for another edition of Legislative Report.